In today's video, we probably have our last batch of NHL trade rumors until after the holidays. And today's teams we're focusing on are the Rangers, Leafs, and the Carolina Hurricanes. As well, just a quick note on, could Pavel Datsyuk potentially return to the NHL? We'll discuss all that coming up next. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams, so if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. So as I mentioned off the top, this is more than likely going to be our last batch in discussion around NHL trade rumors until after the holidays. At this point, the NHL rosters are now frozen, as we've been discussing the last few days, leading up to some videos on players who could have been moved before the roster freeze kicked in last night. But obviously the rosters are now frozen. We didn't really see any moves at all. So all is quiet on the trade front, but there's still all kinds of chatter around things that could happen. But obviously we're going to have to wait until the roster freeze is lifted here after the Christmas holidays and going into the new year. But there's still, like I said, all kinds of talk. So we'll get into that. And if there is anything big that comes along, I'll certainly report on it. But for right now, this very well might be the end of it here for a few days. We're going to be switching gears in a couple days, switching over to mostly covering the World Junior Tournament. But that's for a few more days away here. We'll still have a couple more days of some NHL videos leading up until Christmas, until that tournament gets underway here on Boxing Day. The first team I want to discuss today is the New York Rangers. Now, as we know, the New York Rangers last year started the process of going through a rebuild. And this year so far, they're not doing too bad. They're certainly, right now, not a playoff team, but they're not really all that far out of the hunt. Most teams in the Metropolitan Division, really, even the ones like the Flyers, for example, that near the bottom, are still in it. Like, it's tight enough and there's enough striking distance there that all teams really could potentially get in, especially near the number 3 spot, wild card spot. Like, there's nobody who's really completely out of it, and the Rangers obviously are included in that. It's certainly not a foregone conclusion that they won't be a playoff team, but I do think as the year goes on, they're still going to be interested in selling off some assets, and they very well could end up falling back a little bit in the standing. So time will tell, but a couple of the names that we haven't really talked about in a while, there's been more speculation on recently, include forwards Matt Zuccarello, Kevin Hayes, and Vladimir Nemestikov. Now, any or all of those guys very well could find themselves wearing a New Jersey come to NHL trade deadline later this season. But let's jump in here and take a look at each one. For example, veteran Matt Zuccarello hasn't been playing as much this year. There's been times where he's been a healthy scratch, and he's been quoted a few back, as I think it was about a month ago, indicating that he very well did expect to be traded. I believe there was one time they went on a road trip and he was left at home. So things are certainly not looking good for Zuccarello to be staying, to be a member of the Blue Shirts here too much longer. I mean, he is in the final year of his contract. He's a pending UFA. And based on their youth movement and trying to get younger, faster, more skilled, all the things that the Rangers are trying to do with most other teams that are rebuilding right now, I'm not really sure he fits into those plans longer term. But at the same time, you do need some veterans around, some leadership, etc. So I just don't think he's going to be the guy to stick around. Unfortunately for him, I know he'd probably like to, but it doesn't seem like it's mutual on the Rangers side. So Zuccarello is certainly a player to keep your eyes open for. Right now, I don't think there's a big trade value on him because his production this year is certainly not all that great, but at the same time, any team looking to add some veteran presence in your middle or bottom 6 for the playoff run would certainly see value in Matt Zuccarello. I mean, I still think he's got lots to give, and given a fresh start, I think he could certainly prove that along. We don't have any teams linked to him as of right now, but he's certainly a player not to forget about when you're talking about NHL trade lists. He's just kind of dropped a little bit further down on the trade bait chart this year, just because of the way his season has gone with the Rangers. Now, one of the more interesting members of the Rangers, though, is Vladimir Nemestikov. He seems to be the type of player who's very streaky, kind of hot and cold at times. But right now, there's been more talk about him because he's been playing a little bit better. His production's improved. So it might be a good time for the Rangers to move him because his value would certainly be higher now than it has been at certain times in the past. So it was certainly mentioned when it was first acquired from the Tampa Bay Lightning in that big trade at the deadline last year involving Ryan McDonough that he may not be sticking around with the Rangers too long. I think Nemestikov was a player who was a nice complementary piece who played well at times with Stamkos and Kucherov, but take him off that line and he's not quite the same player. I mean, he's still a decent hockey player, but he's certainly not as productive as he was playing with top players of that magnitude. So it is certainly believed that Nemestikov's another name out there that they very well are looking to shop. And right now might be a better time to move him, considering that his value is a little bit better at the present time, given that his play has been better as of late. Now, on to Kevin Hayes. New York writer Larry Brooks certainly believes that Kevin Hayes should be part of the longer-term solution with the Rangers. He feels like Kevin Hayes has been their best player for the last couple of years, and as long as Hayes isn't requesting a too ridiculous of a contract extension, that the pending UFA forward should be retained in New York and be part of the building block here moving forward. I mean, Kevin Hayes has played relatively well this year. I think he certainly can play in all situations. I mean, he's not, a big name superstar, but he's certainly a very adequate player. Most teams would be, a middle six center iceman, usually number 2 in a lot of cases. He's certainly pretty good on faceoffs, good penalty killer. He can play the power play. He can really do a lot of little things well and certainly be a very valuable piece. I mean, he's had a couple seasons at, 50 plus points. So I do think he's going to be looking for a pretty decent looking longer term deal this offseason. He would have liked to have had one last year. Unfortunately, they couldn't come to terms and ended up settling on a 1-year contract. But it kind of was led to believe at that point in time that Rangers management really weren't interested in committing to Hayes long term. Now, based on his play the last couple of years, based on what the contract he was looking for last year, I don't think that's going to change a whole lot heading into the following offseason. So if they don't like what he's looking for in a contract, he very well could find himself on the way out here by the deadline if they don't feel they're going to re-sign him. But I think that they would get a more value out of Hayes than they would more likely out of the other 2 players I mentioned. Now, in Larry Brooks' article, he mentioned that he felt that if Hayes was going to be traded, that they better be getting a top pair defenseman in return. I'm not quite sure that Kevin Hayes would be that big of an asset to bring that back to the organization, but it certainly would bring back something pretty decent for sure. I do think Hayes has a lot of value, and I guess we'll see. I mean, I wouldn't disagree with the fact that he's been one of their better players and could very well be part of their longer-term solution around a building block in New York. But I guess it really boils down to money and if they want to pay what he's looking for. And it certainly appeared as though he was looking something in the Mika Zibanejad or better range. And I'm not quite sure that, that they would be wanting to pay that. So time will tell, but we could see a lot of these veteran Rangers, like we saw last year, be sold off here before the NHL trade deadline as they continue that rebuild and continue to work on getting younger, faster, and more skilled. So I'd like to hear from you down in the comment section. Where do you see a fit for any of these potential Rangers to be traded to? And what type of return do you think they should be looking for they could potentially attract for these type of players? Now, jumping over to the Toronto Maple Leafs, I don't have any defined rumors for sure, like speculation on what they're looking to do, but I do have an article that I saw from TSN's Craig Button kind of discussing what he thought they should do, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this. The William Nylander saga is long and done. They kind of have a better indication of where their salary cap situation is for the remainder of this season. They certainly have, between $5 and $6 million they can use to make some upgrades, and I guess Craig Button was kind of talking about where he felt they should make that upgrade, and he kind of argued the fact that it could be on defense or it could be in a bottom 6 forward role or maybe even a middle 6 forward role. So let's take a look at some of the names he threw out there as potential guys the Leafs should take a look at, and you let me know in the comments if you agree with any of these or what your thoughts are. And a lot of it obviously is going to depend on the asking price as well. But on defense, if they're looking for an upgrade for some veteran presence who can play bigger minutes and maybe play in different situations, he suggested maybe Alex Edler of the Vancouver Canucks. Edler has got a pretty good shot, can play power play, and he can also log some big minutes. Now, personally, as much as I don't think Edler would be a bad fit in Toronto, I'm not sure that's exactly what they need. Alex Edler also does have a form of a no-trade clause and would have control over that, and he's made it clear he wants to stay in Vancouver, so that very well might not happen, even if they were able to work out a trade. And they don't really need a power play type of guy. They've got that looked after already. So Edler, even though he's that veteran guy, obviously pending UFA, I'm not really sure he's the best fit, but I'd like to know what you think, of course. He also mentioned Detroit Red Wings defenseman Nicholas Kronwall, who's likely going to retire after this year. Obviously, he's got a lot of familiarity with head coach Mike Babcock. Babcock, and Kronwall obviously worked together in Detroit a long time, won a Stanley Cup together, and if he feels like adding a veteran defenseman with a lot of experience on that back end who can play physical especially, then, maybe Babcock might kind of use his influence to suggest maybe that's a player they look at. Not really. I mean, Kronwall in his heyday certainly was a pretty good defenseman. Again, I guess it's low risk here if they can get him for a small price tag. They don't have to worry about a long-term commitment from him, obviously, because he's in the last year of his contract, likely retiring. So long-term implications are low, pretty low-risk move. But again, not really sure I see the fit there. He's tad on the slow side, not as physical as he used to be. So we'll see. But I mean, if they want to add some experience back there as a depth piece, maybe number 7, 8 guy, maybe. But again, I'm sure it also would depend on the asking price. But let me know your thoughts on that player if you think he would fit. Now, he also threw out some names if they want to look at adding a forward. Of course, he talked about Philadelphia Flyers forward Wayne Simmons, who has been speculated to be, possibly on the move. He's a player we've talked about many times. We've looked at before if he would be a fit in Toronto, and he could be, but some people believe that for him to really make an impact and be worth it in Toronto, that he'd have to play top 6 minutes, and I really don't see that happening. I think anybody going into Toronto, if they add a forward, likely would be at best a third-line player. I mean, their top 6 is pretty solid. Barring a significant injury or something, I just don't see that happening, and if he's not going to be given that ice time and play with the right players, he might not be as effective. But there's an argument that the Leafs kind of need to add a little bit more muscle, a little more grit up front. I wouldn't deny that may not be a bad idea. But again, also really boils down to the asking price. And I could see Simmons being a fit there to a degree. But really, again, asking price would be key there, but it's certainly a possibility. He also threw out there LA Kings forward Trevor Lewis as well. Now, Lewis has one more year on his contract after this year, but it's a low cap hit of only $2 million. He's a very versatile type of forward, can play in all situations. Not the most gritty, but at the same time can play, a bit of a physical type of game when required. He's got a lot of experience in the playoffs. He's got some Stanley Cups under his belt. So that factor obviously would be good to a younger team looking to really make their mark in the playoffs as well. So there's another possibility as well that Craig Button thought they should look at. And the other one that he mentioned as well was Carolina Hurricanes forward Michael Ferland, who of course they obtained for the Calgary Flames this past offseason. The big Dougie Hamilton, Noah Hannafin trade. Elias Lindholm, of course, going to Calgary in that deal as well. Ferland's been a pretty good fit in Carolina. Got off to a really good start, scoring lots of goals. Then obviously got hurt and kind of got derailed there. But Ferland really has had a pretty nice season in Carolina so far. We know he can be that sandpaper type of guy. He can play, a very physical power forward type of role. And at the rate he's producing, if he were, like, say, a third-line player, for example, in Toronto, that very well might be an excellent fit and be a good piece for them moving forward. Now, he's also a pending UFA as well. Obviously, with the Leafs situation, with all the contracts they have, I can't imagine them adding a player who's got a lot of term left, at least not right now. That just doesn't make sense for them. But Ferland's an interesting option to look at, really. But again, I'm not sure that the Hurricanes are going to want to move him just yet. I mean, obviously they need scoring. He's been providing it, and they very well likely are interested in locking him up longer term. But at the same time, I guess it kind of boils down to what the return price would be. We've talked about the Hurricanes maybe moving a defenseman before, and could Ferland and a defenseman maybe be packaged up for something better coming back? Perhaps. So based on Craig Button's suggestions here, do any of these players, especially if you're a Leafs fan, make any sense to you? Or do you see the appeal there for them to try to acquire these guys here before the deadline to improve their team and have a better shot at a playoff run and ultimately a Stanley Cup? Now, speaking of Carolina, I was going to segue over to the St. Louis Blues, who the team I want to talk about next. And Carolina apparently has some interest in one of their top guns, and that's Vladimir Tarasenko, who we've discussed here before as well. But so far, we don't have any firm information to say that their Blues are definitely going to move him. But it's something that they seem open to looking at anything and everything. And Elliot Friedman's latest 31 Thoughts blog, which was just came out here in the past hour or two, certainly made the suggestion that the Hurricanes are quite interested. Now, of course, that doesn't mean the Blues are as interested as they are and that a deal is going to happen. But as we know, the Hurricanes are a team that's desperately looking for scoring, and obviously he would be a big upgrade. But it seems as though they would likely be hesitant to move some of their younger prospects, like a Martin Nikash, for example, and that's the asking price from the Blues, which I'm sure they're going to want a good, solid young player amongst other pieces in return. That very well might be a deal breaker for Carolina. I mean, the Hurricanes have built some pretty good-looking prospects, and they're not likely going to want to move that much out of the cupboard. But at the same time, they've still got a fairly young Tarasenko, who's a proven 35 to 40 goal guy. So might be hard to not risk temptation and make that trade if the Blues are willing to go down that road. So again, as we talked about with Nylander, when the speculation was that he may not be signed, the Hurricanes seem to be all in after that. Now they're kind of moving their direction here. So it's clear based on what's going around the league that the Carolina Hurricanes are very interested in obtaining a top-notch scoring winger. So, with Tarasenko being the latest buzz around the league, it's no surprise really that they are interested. And another name to keep your eye on, this is only, again, this is from Elliot Friedman's blog that came out today. It's not so much to say that they're going to trade this guy or they want to, but if the Blues, where they're looking at anything and everything and no player seems to be untouchable there, if they went down the road of maybe making center iceman Braden Schenn available, he suggests that maybe the Vegas Golden Knights might be a team that's interested, given the connection of Braden Schenn to assistant general manager Kelly McCrimmon. Of course, they know each other quite well from Schenn's time in the WHL. He was on McCrimmon's team for 3 years there, so playing with Brandon. So certainly a possibility that McCrimmon certainly likes players he's familiar with. He's a very good resource for the Golden Knights, especially from the Western Hockey League junior players. So given that connection, if the Blues were to go down that road, he feels that Vegas would be a team that would be very interested in taking a look at bringing Brayden Schenn over there to upgrade their forward group as well. Obviously, the Vegas Golden Knights have a pretty solid forward group, but there's certainly lots of opportunity there to make some upgrades for sure. So we'll see. I think Brayden Schenn potentially could be a good fit there if they can get their center iceman lined up to maybe move Paul Stastny down to like a third line role. They'd be especially deep at center ice, and it would make them even a bigger threat come playoff time. But last but not least here, I just want to touch base quickly on Pavel Datsyuk here before we go. Now, there's been some speculation recently that maybe he might be looking to make a return to the NHL soon, as early as possibly next season. His agent has been asked about this, and his agent didn't deny the fact completely that it could happen at some point or that he may want to. Basically, what the answer was is that they take a look at that and talk about it every year, and right now it doesn't seem to be on his radar. But of course, he didn't say that he would completely ever rule it out. The other interesting factor here with that is that Datsyuk's original contract that was with Detroit, of course, was traded to the Arizona Coyotes, and that contract is expiring this coming July the 1st of 2019. So as of that day, he would be an unrestricted free agent, and Arizona would not own his rights anymore, and he could sign and play with anybody he wanted should he make that return. So just like we saw with Ilya Kovalchuk, could we possibly see the same thing with Pavel Datsyuk, make a return on our short term, maybe 1, 2, 3 year contract? Hard to say. I mean, I know when he left to go to the KHL, it was more for family reasons, but I guess, as over time things change, and maybe at some point that could happen. But it doesn't look like that is imminent right now, but there's still quite a bit of time between now and the summertime, and he would be considered an NHL free agent if he were able to make that leap back and try to make a return. So leave me your thoughts down below. Do you think Pavel Datsyuk will ever return to the NHL, and where could he sign? Should he wait until July the 1st and be a free agent and kind of go down the same route we saw with Ilya Kovalchuk? So if you're new to the channel, I hope you consider subscribing. We cover all 31 NHL teams, and there's plenty of content here for all hockey fans to enjoy. So if you're new, hit that subscribe button. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up before you go. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you very much for watching, everybody. We will catch you next time.